Before I formally start the meeting, I'll go to each committee member to confirm that they can hear and be heard. This is a legal requirement for me to do so. So if you could verbally confirm that you're able to hear me, and I will confirm in response that I can hear you. Where practicable, please have your video switched on so that you can be seen by the other members in attendance and the public watching. Councillor Christy Balderson.
Morning, Chair. I can hear and see you.
Thank you. Councillor Dave Bolter.
Good morning, Chair. I can see and hear you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolter. Councillor Peter Ginman.
Good morning, Chairman. I can see you and hear you.
Thank you. Councillor Bob Matthews is yet to join us, I believe. So we'll come back to him. Thank you. Councillor Diana Toynbee.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can see you and hear you.
Thank you. And Councillor Watson is not joining us until a little later on this morning. So I'd also like to request that the officers who will be present through the meeting also confirm that they can hear and be heard. Kate Charlton from Interim Head of Legal Services.
Yes, Chair. Good morning. I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Jackie Gooding, Southwest Audit Partnership.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Andrew Lovegrove, our Chief Finance Officer.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Amy Probert from the Southwest Audit Partnership.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can hear you and see you.
Thank you. Caroline Marshall, a clerk to our committee.
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear you.
Jen Preece, acting as technical support to our committee this morning.
Yes, Chair, I can hear and see you. Thank you.
John Roberts from Grant Thornton.
Good morning, everyone. I can see and hear you.
Thank you. And is Gail Turner-Radcliffe with us this morning? Yes.
Good morning, Chair. I can see and hear you.
Thank you. And Claire Ward, Solicitor to the Council.
Good morning. I can confirm I can see and hear you, Chairman.
And I'm just going to pause for a moment as Bob Matthews has just joined us this morning. Councillor Matthews, can you hear and see me? Councillor Matthews, can you hear me? Councillor Matthews, can you hear me?
Councillor Shaw, it appears that Councillor Matthews is having some technical difficulties,
right.
So we'll try and resolve those technical difficulties.
Okay, and we'll come back. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's meeting. The Council is video and audio streaming this meeting live on the internet and making an official recording. The recording forms part of the public record of the meeting and will be available on the Council's website. Please note that while it is only a legal requirement to have your audio switched on, it is the Council's preference that, where you're able to do so, you also have video switched on. Please remember what you say and do in this meeting has a global reach and your words and actions should be chosen carefully. Can I also remind members to ensure that they're wearing the headsets while speaking during the meeting? This ensures that the audio quality is the highest possible quality and the background noise is significantly reduced. As these are extraordinary circumstances, there are some additional points for members and officers to be aware of. As part of our meeting etiquette, in line with our normal committee practices, all microphones apart from mine will be placed on mute at the start and during the meeting. I'll run through the agenda in the customary way. When you wish to speak, please use the hand button against your name in the participants list, which should be to the right of your screens. I will then invite you to speak in the order of the hands being raised. Please remember to unmute yourself to speak and mute yourself when you have finished. Please do not raise your physical hand as I do not want to miss anyone who may wish to speak. Please note the chat facility has been switched off to ensure that members' contributions can be offered through the spoken voice and for the public record. Please ensure all mobile devices are switched off to prevent interference with the audio and video system. If any attendee loses connection to the meeting, it will be paused to ascertain if the connection can be restored quickly. If it is not possible to recover the connection within a reasonable amount of time, the meeting will continue as long as the quorum of committee members remains able to hear the proceedings and to be heard. If you plan to leave before the end of the meeting, please can you indicate this in advance. Voting will be undertaken electronically using the voting software within the virtual meeting platform. Only committee members may vote. In the event that electronic voting is not possible to use or there is technology failure, I'll ask each committee member by means of a roll call to indicate if they are for, against, or are abstaining. The results of the roll call will only be recorded in the minutes of the meeting where there is a requirement to do so. Are there any questions about the procedures before we continue?
Chair, would you mind just checking to see if Councillor Matthews can now hear and see us, please?
Councillor Matthews, can you hear and see me? You don't appear to be on mute at the moment, so if you speak. Councillor Matthews, can you hear me? No, it doesn't appear to be hearing me.
Chair, could I request a 5-minute adjournment just to see if we can sort out Councillor Matthews' technical difficulties?
Yes, by all means. We'll all remain online, as it were, for 5 minutes while we just try and contact him.
Caroline, just to confirm, do you want the live stream to be paused?
Yes, would you pause the live stream?
After the beep, we will...
Thank you for that adjournment. We're now back in the live meeting. Councillor Matthews, can you hear and see me? He's now on the phone. Councillor Matthews, can you just confirm for the record that you can hear and see me? Thank you.
Chairman.
That's all right.
I've got calls coming in from Crednhill, rather urgent ones, and it all interfered. So
no, that's fine. As long as you can hear and see us, that's good. Right.
Sorry about that.
That's quite all right. Agenda item 1: apologies from absence. We have no apologies for absence, although we're aware that Councillor Watson will be joining the meeting a little bit later, and therefore there are no name substitutions. Item 2, any declarations of interest. Item 3, any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interest to be declared for items on the agenda today. No. Item 4, minutes of the previous meeting of the 25th of September 2020. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. So I'd ask, therefore, committee members please to cast your vote either for, against, or to abstain. Please can you remember to press submit after selecting the option for which you're voting. If you're unable to see the voting options, please access the poll icon at the bottom of your screen. Can I have confirmation of the voting number?
The voting number will be 6, Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. So has the vote been cast yet? Thank you. If tech support will confirm when all votes cast or the number of outstanding votes for votes cast, can you state the result?
Chair, all votes are in and the minutes have been approved unanimously.
Thank you. I'm happy that all the minutes are approved. Can we invite everyone back from the waiting room? Right, welcome back to everyone that's been in the waiting room. The minutes were approved. The committee's action tracker is attached to the minutes. And are there any members who wish to raise any questions on the action tracker? No. Agenda item 5 then, to receive any questions from members of the public. Can the clerk confirm that there were no questions from members of the public?
No questions were received from members of the public.
And agenda item 6, receive any questions from councillors. Were any questions received from councillors?
No questions were received from councillors.
Thank you. Agenda item 7 then, the proposed revised internal audit plan 2020-21. I think Jackie Gooding and Amy Probert from the Southwest Audit Partnership will present this. The purpose of this paper is for us to be assured that the level and range of activity within the proposed revised annual audit plan is sufficient to provide assurance over the council's corporate governance arrangements and provides appropriate coverage of key business activities, associated risks and risk management processes. So Jackie, I don't know if yourself or Amy are leading on this one. It's the item that we had to defer, I think, from last meeting.
Yes, thank you,
so
Chair.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. If I could ask you to return to page 31 of the report pack, which is the overview of the reasons for the revised internal audit plan. So as you're aware, the internal audit plan for 2021 was approved by the committee on the 5th of May. Clearly, a lot has changed since that date, and as such, an updated and proposed revised audit plan for the remainder of 2021 is provided on pages 32 to 38 of the report. The plan that had previously been prepared is likely to remain relevant in many aspects, but the huge effort of the authority is undertaking in relation to response and recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to push back a significant proportion of this work. As such, an updated plan has been prepared following consultation with the Chief Finance Officer, and the plan has been shared with the Management Board. Internal audit continues to respond to requests to support COVID-19 work, and this will continue to cause some disruption to the plan, particularly where there is a definitive date for declaration to the relevant government department. As an example, since putting the plan together for the meeting today, I have already had requests for an additional 4 pieces of work, all related to COVID-19. The plan will continue to be reviewed as the year progresses, and changes to the plan will be reported to this committee in my internal audit progress update reports. When reviewing the proposed revised plan, the key questions to consider include: are the areas selected for coverage this year appropriate? Does the internal audit plan cover the organisation's key risks as they are recognised by the Management Board and the Audit and Governance Committee? Is sufficient assurance being received within our annual plan to monitor the organisation's risk profile effectively? The proposed revised plan on pages 32 to 38 identifies where it is suggested to move audits to 2021-22 and includes the additional audits that have already been added to the plan for 2020-21. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jackie. Are there, committee, any questions coming forward? Councillor Ginman.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for that explanation. And I think it comes as no surprise in view of COVID and the effects of COVID that you're getting asked some extra questions. I mean, I think that is going to be an area that's going to be recurring, and one which, as a committee, we will clearly want to be sure what the effects are, how they are being dealt with, and the risks that they particularly are going to apply. To that end, when I'm looking down the list of all of these existing audits and where you've got your priorities, I do get slightly nervous where I see it's a high priority, but it's not started. And there's quite a few of those, and obviously there's quite a few that are deferred. And actually deciding that the priorities are still high, I'm presuming you keep looking at those and comparing those with the risk register and deciding that the risk register has determined that those are high. And if they're still high, then why haven't we started them is the sort of question that comes to my mind.
Thank you, Councillor Ginman. Yes, you're correct. We do refer to the risk register, and obviously those, I've linked them to the risk within the strategic risk register for members to see. You will have a number of risk or priority audits that will be high during the year, but they will be completed throughout the year. They're not all going to be done at the first part within the first quarter of the year, as an example. So there will be high priority audits that will be planned to be done within the financial year, but not all within quarter one or quarter two. In relation to reviewing the plan, yes, we will continue to review the plan as the year progresses. We will try to include and maintain time to complete the higher priority audits, but it may be with additional work in relation to COVID-19 that we have to complete in relation to returns, particularly to the government, and some of that work will unfortunately have to be pushed back into 2021-22.
So may I make a follow-up on that then? That if you're stating it as high, should there not be some sort of timeline here where we then can see what the slippage actually is? So if you say it's a higher priority, to me, that sounds as though you intended to start it tomorrow. And if you haven't started it tomorrow, I don't really want to be reading it's still high in April next year. It's very difficult to get a handle on how you're prioritizing, what is then getting slippage if we haven't actually got timelines against them.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Ginman. The high priorities are high priority because they're audits that we feel we should do in this financial year, not necessarily tomorrow or the next day, but within this financial year. So perhaps we're looking at it from a slightly different slant on what that high priority actually means. So the high priority is that those are the audits that we would want to include within this financial year, if we have the time and capacity to deliver those audits, taking into account the additional work in relation to COVID-19.
So I'm still going to push my point. Shouldn't there be timelines somewhere here that give an indication of when you're intending that they're started by? You're saying in the financial year, that still gives us a year, but some of these are quite critical. And with COVID, one would be concerned that they could be easily affected in a matter of months if they were not actually pushed on and dealt with.
Yes, we do have a timeline for the audit. So the working spreadsheet that we use in relation to the audit plan, or the audits are planned for a particular quarter. So as an example, the key financial control audits, which are in the plan, will be completed in quarter three. Obviously, that, as you quite rightly say, that's not in the plan that is presented before you today. But what I can do is, following conclusion of the committee today, and once we've had agreement on moving the plan forward, I can, at the next meeting, the progress report will show you when those audits are planned to be completed. In the progress reports that you would normally receive, we do indicate whether they're quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, or quarter four audits.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair. I think that would be very helpful, because we would at least have a handle on what slippage is occurring, and then we can get an explanation of why, because clearly it's going to happen, and it's proper that we understand how difficult it is, and where it's happening, and indeed the potential impact, and what effect that has on the risk register, because in itself it becomes quite a notable part of risk.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Ginman. Yes, when I bring my progress report in November, the audits will be assigned to a particular quarter, so you'll be able to see where the work should have been completed and where there has been slippage, or moving forward where there may be slippage, and the reason for that as well.
Thank you. And I'm presuming that if work on an area which is given a high status is not completed within the financial year, that you would only be able to give a limited assurance or no assurance on that particular matter. Is that a correct interpretation, or am I overstating the case?
Thank you, Chair. No, the audits that we do not complete, so if for any reason we can't complete an audit due to additional work in relation to COVID or additional work in relation to an emerging risk, That audit will then move into 2021-22, but we won't give an opinion on that piece of work until we've actually done the work, which would be 2021-20, which might not be until 21-22.
But as our responsibility, if you like, is to council to give assurance on audit and governance, but on audit, I'm just a bit uncomfortable that if audits that we've agreed, the 151 officers agreed, we as a committee have agreed, and the management board have agreed, are priority items haven't been completed, that the assurance that we can give to council is in some way impaired. Is that an overstatement?
Thank you, Chair. The audit work that would replace an audit would obviously give an assurance level as well. So there will be assurance that will replace an audit if we don't do that piece of work, and that will have an assurance level which will also feed into the annual opinion at the end of the financial year.
I thank you for that answer. I'll have to have a think about that. I've got 3 hands up, Councillor Matthews, then Councillor Balderson, and then Councillor Toynbee.
Thank you, Chairman.
Matthews.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to ask a very similar question to what Councillor Jimman asked, so I fully endorse what he's been inquiring about. So just to fit something in, one thing that concerns me, Chairman, I'd like Jackie and perhaps Mr. Lovegrove to comment on the proactive fraud work. That's been pushed back to 21-22. Surely if we got some improper activity, that should be pursued with immediate effect. Could Jackie and Mr. Lovegrove please comment on that?
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. So within the annual plan for this year, we had a number of areas where we were anticipating on doing some proactive fraud work. We're not saying that there is fraud in that area, but when we do proactive fraud work, it may raise some red flags, which would require further investigation. So although some of those audits may well be pushed back to 2021-22, we will still complete that work. But yes, you're right, there will be a delay in determining any areas that may need further investigation within that particular service area.
Chair, if I can add to that, the work of the council, certainly in the last 6 months, has been very different to what we originally thought it would be. And we have been doing an awful lot of work around the response to COVID with various grants and various support mechanisms that we have been involved with, and handing out large sums of money to our businesses and individuals on there. And we have taken a very proactive role in dealing with the prevention and detection of fraud in those processes, and we've been fully engaged with the arrangements that central government have put in place to deal with fraud prevention and fraud detection, and also in helping ongoing fraud inquiries. So Councillor Matthew makes a very valid point that the potential for fraud is always there, and during these difficult times when doing things that are unusual, there is an increased risk of fraud. But I can assure the committee that we have been fully engaged in that process, and our counter-fraud officer and his team have been very proactive in working with the other agencies and with our auditors to ensure that we minimise the impact of fraud, and potential fraudsters and fraudsters are reported and dealt with through the appropriate agencies.
Thank you both for reassuring us.
Thank you. Councillor Balderson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So my questions, really, if I take a step back, looking at the deferred audits, we're looking at about 21 deferred audits out of about 61 planned and not injected due to COVID. So this is representing about a 35% deferral rate. And I can see that the biggest impact is in adults and children's. I mean, we're deferring about 55% of our planned audits in adults, and about 50% of the work that we're going to do covering children's. So it puts a couple of questions in my mind. I appreciate that the risk landscape has changed significantly with COVID, and so we do need to focus efforts on COVID. but also cognizant of the risk analysis work that you did to initially develop this plan. Should we be cutting so much of this plan? Should we potentially be discussing the purchasing perhaps of more days? Do you think, in your opinion, we can still provide an effective opinion with such a cut in the initial plan? And also just trying to understand that you had a particular coverage across all these different areas, and I'm unsure how the injection of the COVID work impacts those areas. So are we still getting a similar coverage across the areas, given the deferral in adults and children's? And you indicate that you are continuously responding to COVID work, so you've got another 4 requests. So my concern is, at the minute, we've got a 35% deferral rate. By the end of the year, that could be significantly larger, and I just am still confused as to the impact that would have on your overall opinion. So I know that's lots of questions, so I apologise, but yeah, that's sort of where my mind's heading at. So I'd appreciate your response to those, Jackie.
Thank you, Councillor Bowles, and you make some very good points. Yes, there will be a reduction in the coverage in certain areas in the audit plan this year. It is only to be expected with the additional work that we'll be doing in relation to the COVID-19 response. Certainly, some of those COVID-19 response areas may cover some of the areas that you've mentioned as well. So although we may not be delivering the actual audits we agreed in the plan, we may be delivering on some COVID-19 work that also impacts on those areas. In relation to the annual opinion at the end of the year, it's very difficult at the moment to determine how or what the impact will be. It is widely expected that across all internal audit teams, across all local authorities, that COVID-19 pandemic is going to have an impact on audit work, significant impact on audit work that was in the original plan. What I can say is that the additional work that we complete will feed into our assurance opinion, because we will be providing assurance on those areas of additional funding, and assurance on how that money's been distributed, assurance on the fraud risk associated with it. So all those areas will feed into the plan, will feed into the internal or annual opinion. But you are quite correct, there will be lower coverage in some areas than we had anticipated. As I say, I can't tell you at the moment how that impact will be, as we don't really know exactly what the changes are going to be between now and the end of the financial year. It would seem at the moment that there's something new that comes out probably every week, and within that there's always going to be a requirement for internal audit to have some involvement. So it will be a very much changing plan. In relation to additional capacity or additional days, obviously that is something that perhaps Mr. Loverow will be in a better position to respond on. At the moment, as an audit team, we have a certain capacity to deliver a plan, and we will still be delivering, if you look at days, the number of days that you would anticipate within that plan, but those days will be delivered in a different way and looking at different areas to what we originally planned.
Yeah, I'd appreciate if Mr. Lovegrove could make a comment, because I guess as a new councillor, one of the things from a broader perspective is I have no comparison to the number of days that we have in our plan. Is it reasonable, or is it comparative to other similar sized councils with similar activities to ours? I have no visibility around that. So having that discussion as to whether it is enough days to complete everything, I'd be interested to understand the Section 151 officer's opinion and yours on that.
Chair, I'm happy to comment on that. And I think Jackie made the key point that all of the audit work that SWAP carry out on behalf of the council adds to the body of evidence and the assurance that they can give you as a committee and to the council. So as we've said before, that because of the changing nature of the pandemic, yes, they are doing work that we didn't put in the original plan, but because they are reacting to the changing dynamic of going through dealing with the pandemic. And announcement this week, the landscape has changed again on the issues around the COVID and the pandemic, and government have announced further funding for local government on Monday evening that's coming through to our way. In terms of the purchasing additional days, we have had conversations within SWAP and ourselves, and there is some capacity within the wider SWAP network to provide additional days. And I think given the, as we've just seen in very recent times, further requests for additional COVID type audit work, I think it is appropriate to consider purchasing those extra days to do some of the non-COVID work in our plan that, as we've said, if we don't, will have to be delayed to allow the capacity to deal with COVID. So if it's acceptable to the committee, then I will have those conversations with SWAP to arrange that we do secure additional days that is part of the wider SWAP network to enable additional audit capacity to be brought into the system. I think we do have to recognise that the COVID situation is dynamic and is likely to change again over the coming weeks, days and months, but we will react to it. But I'm very happy to pursue those conversations as well and agree additional capacity to be acquired for this year. On the wider debate around whether the level of days is the correct level, I think as we've decided at earlier meetings, that's something we will agree to review in terms of the engagement of SWAP. But seeing what is delivered to other SWAP organisations, because we are a member of SWAP, we are broadly comparable to the number of audit days to other SWAP partners, but it's always good to have a review and look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Lovegrove. I've been pleased to admit Councillor Watson to the meeting. Councillor Watson, just for the record, can you confirm that you can see and hear me?
Yes, good morning, Chair. I'm sorry I'm late. Yes, I can hear and see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. We're on agenda item 7. When it comes to time to vote on this item, you will have to consider whether you've heard enough of the discussion in order to provide a vote. You may wish to abstain or vote for or against, but we have been discussing the matter for a little time now. Just if I may just go back, I've got Councillor Toynbee still to speak, but just I wanted to check with Mr. Lovegrove, promoting you or demoting you, I'm not sure. The government funding for COVID, how much of that has been allocated towards audit by the management, and how much of so if we're looking at quite a significant amount of our normal audit work now being COVID related, is that all funded through the government funding, or are we spending, as it were, some of our normal audit funding to cover the COVID emergency?
Chair, there's some very good questions there. In terms of the funding from government, it's coming in two main streams for COVID activity. The largest amount of that is coming through as an unfinanced grant for the council, and we're not allocating that to particular areas of the council or other council's activities. As reported to Cabinet, we report the financial position for the parts of the council and then show the funding separately. So we don't individually allocate, partly because it's a dynamic moving area and those management accounts are based on forecasts, and as we know, forecasts are best views at a point in time, but as things unfurl in front of us, things will change. We also received contributions from government, either in ring-fence grants or to cover our costs. So for the work that the council did on delivering grants to businesses, we are allocated a new burdens payment that will cover the cost of administering those payments, which will include things like the audit work that we have to do. Now, at the moment, because of the pressures within central government, we've not had the exact details of the new burdens payments that we will receive for those grant things, so we are awaiting that. But I am assuming that that will be sufficient to cover the costs of the audit work and also the additional staffing costs that we incurred to deploy those grants. So to answer the question, there is sufficient funding from the COVID monies from government to fund this additional audit work. Some of the audits will be funded by the new burdens grant to cover that particular activity, and the other bits of work will be covered from the major unring-fence grants that we get or are receiving.
So to be even more sort of direct, you're not concerned that we're reducing our internal audit activity as a result of insufficient funding, either directed through the executive or the management board for you to provide for the internal audit function?
That's correct, Chair. The decisions about which audits to do and these additional audits that we're picking up as with COVID is based on the needs and the risk assessment. It's not a financial decision as such. We have a set budget for the core days of audit work, and as we on the pre-zone, we will allocate additional funding to fund the extras.
Your assurance is noted on that. I've got Councillor Toynbee. John Roberts, you've put your hand up. Is that to do with this item, or
it is, Chair? Yes.
Perhaps if Councillor Toynbee can wait, I'll bring you in then at this point.
Only very briefly, so that the committee is aware that external audit is also impacted by COVID and lockdown working arrangements and so on, which do take longer. Although we can get there, we're estimating about 25 to 30% longer to do the work, and there's fee implications on that as well, which need to be sort of factored in. We save cost too, so we will be saving cost on our travelling and expenses and things like that, which we clearly offset against that, and we would be looking to take some of that cost ourselves, but there will be a balance that we'll be engaging with officers to discuss when we get to the end of the audit.
I'm sure Mr. Lovegrove is looking forward to those discussions in due course. Councillor Toynbee.
Yes, thank you. Some of my questions actually have already been asked. It's interesting that all this a lot of it is centred around COVID. Yeah, I was just wondering, I don't know quite who to ask this to, but it can almost get a bit circular with the impact of COVID on it disrupts the audit plan, and that disruption is itself a risk. So it all sort of begins to get quite circular. And I'm just wondering, following on from what Andrew was saying, if there's value in, are we actually sort of quantifying the cost to the council of COVID? Is the value in doing that? Is it impossible because things are constantly changing and balancing between what we're getting from central government? You know, obviously there's lost income on one side, there's pressure on officers, there's, you know, when people were redeployed, obviously it's had a huge impact. Can we quantify that? Is it important that we do sort of keep track of it?
Like to pick that up?
Chair, I'm very happy to pick that up. We are tracking the costs of dealing with the pandemic. On there, as Councillor Toynbee said, it is a dynamic and fast-moving situation. So we are tracking. I think what we will end up doing, along with a lot of other councils, when we're through the pandemic phase, we will look back and learn some lessons, and also we will evaluate the cost, direct and indirect, to the council or the taxpayer of dealing with the pandemic arrangement. the challenge we face at the moment, it is very fast moving, and for all the obvious reasons that we're being asked to do things, and we are doing things to help the residents and businesses of the county to deal with the pandemic. And sometimes there's a bit of a lag in terms of the detail coming from central government, or as we're seeing, the advice from the experts is reacting to the nature of the pandemic, and that changes on a fairly regular basis. So I don't have an exact figure today, but we are tracking it. And I think, as I said at the end, we will have a lessons learned and a backward look as to the impact on the council.
Thank you. Could I just come back very briefly? Thank you, Andrew. That's very helpful. And I'm sure people will completely understand that we can't have an amount now. I mean, I'm sure there are members of the public who would like to know exactly how much has it cost us so far. But I think we can quite reasonably reply that is difficult to answer. So it's good to know that we can say that it is being tracked and monitored. Thank you.
Thank you. I have three questions that I'd just like to ask, perhaps in a little bit more detail on the forward plan, page 32 of our papers. We include their commercial investments as a category. It's a medium risk. You put some 2 or 3 sentences there, 2 sentences there to explain the nature of the audit. You've got that yield is currently an important factor. I just wonder if you'd be able, Jackie, to comment on what the issues are that concern you with respect to yield in this context. On the next page, page 33, we've got Brexit preparedness deferred from 2019-20 and not started. I'm kind of thinking that December the 31st is a month closer than it was at the last audit committee meeting, and I'm just questioning whether this work in fact will get done to be able to have any useful impact on the council prior to December the 31st, and whether it is worth doing it subsequent to December the 31st. So a thought on that, if I can. And on page 34, again, looking at commercial properties and rents, we include a long list of things, areas to view, setting of rents, payment terms, discounts, invoicing and debt recovery, write-offs, vetting, rent, lots of things there. But it doesn't talk about building surveys and tenants dilapidations, and those are two things which have recently come to the forefront of our minds in connection with both the Hereford Pool and Bromyard Leisure Centre, and probably in other areas that I don't know about. I'm just wondering if you'd be able to include those in the list, of whether 151 officer would agree that they should be included. So 3 questions there, hopefully simple answers, I'm sure.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. If we go with your first question in relation to commercial properties, as you say, the audit is still in the plan and we are still intending to complete the piece of work. In relation to the yield, as we know, the return on commercial properties is very much an unknown at the moment. With the COVID-19 pandemic, nobody really knows what is going to happen, where the investment has been made, and will those returns continue, and will the percentage yield stay as expected, or will that percentage yield reduce? Obviously, that will be something that we will look at as part of the audit when we complete the audit. In relation to Brexit preparedness, yes, you're quite right. 31st of December will be here before we know. It was deferred from the plan last year, and we haven't started the work. But we are planning to start the work shortly, and we can obviously discuss with the officers prior to starting the work the areas that they would like us to focus on in relation to that. So we should be able to complete the work before 31st of December. Obviously, nobody really knows what the final outcomes will be in relation to Brexit, but it's understanding what the council has done in preparation for whatever those outcomes will be. In relation to the commercial rents, commercial properties, that audit has just recently commenced. I have to say, I'm not sure that building surveys and tenants dilapidations has been included within the scope. Certainly, we are looking at the impact of COVID-19 on commercial rents and commercial properties as part of the scope of the audit. But I can certainly go back to the auditor and speak to the officer and see whether we can include some work around building surveys and tenants dilapidations as part of that process.
It might be more broadly expressed as quality of management by the council of its buildings, which might include those matters. Thank you for that. I've got two hands up, and then perhaps we'll move on. Councillor Balderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is following on from Councillor Toynbee's questions around COVID, and also your question around our Brexit preparedness. I'm conscious that I think in our last meeting we recommended that our Brexit preparedness be potentially reviewed by scrutiny. So I'm not quite sure whether that has been taken on board or not, and how that would link in or not link into a potential audit. But thinking along those lines, and the role of scrutiny in terms of holding cabinet members, etc., to account, would, given COVID, the impact of COVID, us operating under emergency powers, etc., is that something that along the same lines as Brexit preparedness is something that potentially should be on a scrutiny working paper, if it isn't already, or whether it's our scrutiny or general scrutiny, I'm not quite sure. But that's just a question, I guess, to the monitoring officer or Angela Grove.
Thank you. Is Claire?
Yeah, I'm happy to assist, Chair. Following your last meeting, I did make a referral into scrutiny for the EU preparedness. I'm advised that will go into their work planning session. That's what they do after every AGM. They look at what their work, so it isn't yet on the work programme, because that's I think it's definitely in the next 4 weeks, that meeting. We've now got it on the corporate risk register as a risk. But I do not yet know whether scrutiny are going to accept it as a piece of work. I would have thought they will, given the implications.
And how about the general COVID? I mean, Councillor Toynbee was bringing out the fact that we really need to be more aware. Well, it would be great to be more aware of the impact that it's having across the board. Is it being reported through to a scrutiny committee? Is it the role of? Should we be reviewing it at our response? And because it could be for a much longer period of time. So
I'm not aware that it is yet on a scrutiny programme. The review at the moment, obviously the impacts and the risks is within its own risk register. Remember, we made that decision we would keep it as a separate risk register, not bring it into business as usual, which is still the position. And obviously you see that risk register, as does Cabinet, as part of the quarterly performance. But I'm not sure we've got it anywhere else at the moment. So perhaps we do want to consider that further.
Depends what the other members think.
Well, are you putting that as a recommendation, Councillor Balderson, or are you?
Oh, I'm happy to understand what the other members think on that.
Right. Sorry, Claire.
I was just wondering whether the right place is to bring it back here as impact of the risk. So when you next see that COVID risk register, that actually there is some detail in the cover report about the impact to services So rather than seeing it as a risk register, seeing it as that bigger piece, could I make that suggestion?
I think that would be helpful. I'm conscious of mission creep in relation to that. The activity that the council has undertaken as a result of the challenges of the COVID emergency really should be coming under scrutiny. We're here to assure that we've got an audit and governance in place. As entertaining as it might be, I'm just conscious of that a little bit of frissons. But if we can look at that, if we can have an expansion of and an understanding of how those risks are and the changing risks are affecting council, then perhaps that would be a useful document to have and to take forward. I've still got Councillor Ginman and Councillor Watson, and then I want to move on. So Councillor Ginman.
Yeah, thank you. A question that just arose out of your comment with vis-a-vis the commercial properties. I just wondered as to how, Jackie or Andrew, how do you measure, how do you audit social value when acquiring commercial property? How do you ensure that there is some measure that shows how that value is taken on board? Because not all commercial property is going to be bought for and sold for or reach commercial rents per se, but may have considerable social value to a community. In other words, how do we value that so that we're clear that the activity does, at the end of the day, have value?
Thank you. It's Andrew. You've indicating you're prepared to give an answer to that.
Yes, Chair. I think it's a very valid and an important question to ask, and it comes back to why the council acquired the property in the first place. I think is probably the key part of that process. Now, the council owns properties for a range of reasons. Some of those because it's inappropriate, they're in public ownership. So the city wall is a good example that that needs to be held on behalf of residents on there. Clearly, we don't expect a return on that. At the other end of the spectrum, we own property and buildings and land that we just expect a commercial return on. Part of that is enabling the economic development and activity to happen within the county, and we act as the landlord just collecting a commercial rent. But we also own assets partly for the commercial return, partly to influence the market, so enabling social activities to happen. So it does very much look at the reason for the acquisition, why council bought the property, and that so there are things that we own and rent out that we don't seek the highest commercial rent because of the activity is something we want to seek and encourage either as part of economic development. So the enterprise zone is a good example that the council wanted to promote economic growth within the county. So that the way that the enterprise zone has been set up is very much designed to promote that on there. And other acquisitions that have been done recently have been done, partly for the social value and partly for a reasonable return from the asset on there. So in terms of measuring that added social value, that is a harder challenge than the pound notes comparing the rent. So that is something that we're looking at, and the council is working on its social value policy and how that will impact. So I think it's an evolving area in terms of how we audit that, because I think the council is working through how it wants to measure and value the added social value from the assets that it owns.
And I suppose to get agreement that value for money in terms of social value is understood by both internal and external auditors and by the wider public as well. Councillor Watson, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this point's already been raised, so I apologise in advance. It's about the oral health needs assessment. I notice on page 36 that it's community ambition, but under the headline, additional adults and communities. And I'm just wondering, because I'm aware that it sits within the corporate services now, that's public health, which leads on the oral health needs assessment. So I'm just wondering why it's under additional adults and community audits when it's actually no longer in that portfolio.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. The reason it sits under there at the moment is because the initial request for work came from the Director of Adults and Community, Stephen Vickers, and that's why it's shown in the plan. If it has moved since we put it into the plan, obviously we can reflect that in our updates, which we bring to you at the next meeting.
Okay, and just following on from that, sorry, I noticed too that that the Director of many items have been deferred by the Director of Adults and Communities, and I'm assuming that he advised SWAP that he wasn't able to progress. That's how I've read it correctly. Is that right? You know, he wasn't advised by you, but he advised you, SWAP. Okay, thank you.
That's correct. We had a discussion with the Director of Adults and Communities about the audits in the plan, and obviously some of these have not moved forward as expected due to COVID-19, and that's why the plan has been revisited and reviewed, particularly in relation to adults and communities.
Thank you very much, Jackie.
And just to confirm on that, Jackie, it's because of the availability of staff within adults and communities rather than the availability of auditing time that's deferred these.
That's correct. Some of the audits, it will be availability of staff, but also some of the processes that we were going to look at have not progressed as quickly as it was expected, and it would not necessarily be the best time to go in and carry out an audit at the moment. So we've agreed to defer them to the 2021-22 plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that then. Do we have any recommendations going forward from that, Caroline? Were there any?
I made a note of 4, I think.
Right.
Details of when internal audits will be started.
We can't hear you, Caroline, for some reason.
Oh, sorry. That's
right.
better.
That's
right.
why.
Okay. So the 4 that I've got are details of when internal audits will be started to be detailed in the progress reports provided to the committee. The details will also include, if necessary, reasons for any slippage. The Chief Finance Officer to discuss with SWAP about acquiring additional SWAP days to undertake internal audit. SWAP to discuss with officers and internal auditor in connection with including the quality of management of the council-owned buildings in the commercial property audit detailed on page 34 of the agenda pack. Details of the impact of the COVID-19 risks on the service areas to be included within the next corporate risk register report to the committee.
Well done for catching those. I think that sums up.
I'm sorry, could we just
Karen.
have the final one repeated, please?
Yeah, so that's details of the impact of the COVID-19 risks on the service areas to be included within the next corporate risk register report to the committee.
That's reflecting, I think, the comments made in respect of how in the wider sense of the COVID-19 affecting the work of the directorates. Councillor Ginman, you've got your hand up.
Yes, on that first item, which reflects the point I was raising, I think it was not just the slippage on when they are started, but also the slippage on the estimated time of completion. I think we need to have both. I don't think it's just we do need to know why something is not happening and what's slipping, but we also need to know if it's not getting completed. We really want to be on top of what's the problem and why is the hold up. So we need to see slippage on completion as well.
Right. Yes, Caroline, can we just amend that slightly? Councillor Balderson. I can't hear you. Don't know why. Unplug and replug your mic, perhaps.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep. I just wanted to confirm with Caroline with that last point, because I know Councillor Watson highlighted COVID has impacted service delivery. So I wanted to ensure that that was encapsulated. And could you just confirm when we're expected to, in our work programme, review the risk register again?
The risk register is, the next risk register report is due at the November committee meeting.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Is there a voting vote ready for us to cast our votes on for those? The recommendations, as we've discussed, being that the risks the council as lender are, sorry, I'm moving on too far, aren't I? That the proposed revised internal audit plan is reviewed and the committee has determined these recommendations in regards to making the level and range of activities proposed and the work carried out may give a satisfactory level of assurance of the council's corporate governance arrangements, with those 4 recommendations included. So, Caroline, are we ready to take a vote on that? Is everybody happy to take the vote on block? And obviously, Councillor Watson, you haven't heard all of the discussion, so I'll leave it up to you whether you feel you're able to vote on everything here.
There will be 7 voting members, Chair, if Jen would like to start the poll.
Right, thank you. I see. You should have seen the voting form and don't forget to press submit. Do we have a result? Has everybody voted and pressed submit?
Yes, Chairman, all votes are in. 6 in favour to approve those recommendations, 1 abstention.
Thank you. If you can admit everybody from the waiting room. Thank you. The result was that the resolutions were all passed. If I can make a slight adjustment to the agenda at this time, I'm conscious that Claire Ward needs to leave us at about 12 or thereabouts. I propose taking agenda item 9, the confidential reporting code whistleblowing, first before the energy from waste loan update. Is everybody content that I do that? Thank you. So if I can turn to agenda item 9, the confidential reporting code whistleblowing, and ask Claire Ward to present. The purpose of this is to review and agree changes to the council's whistleblowing policy. And you'll remember that we did form a small working party to work on a draft policy earlier in the year. Claire.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for moving the item on the agenda. Yeah, you'll see that the working group and I have been working with the trade unions as well on developing this new policy. The new policy takes into account the tone and language that I know the committee were it was impressed upon me to make it more user-friendly, not too legalistic. It provides now a check and balance in relation to anonymity and also all reported concerns being copied to another monitoring officer. It also provides now 4 clear steps for escalation and provides support details that I know committee members also wanted to have included. I believe the policy is now ready to be considered by this committee, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Claire. Do we have any questions from anybody? Councillor Ginman.
Yeah, simply to say thank you to Claire, because as you know, I raised this originally because I was concerned by the nature of the language and trying to get it into what I would call a parlance of that is better understood, more user-friendly, and also a process that's more user-friendly. And having the external, I think, is important to try to ensure confidence. The principle being that whistleblowing is a way in which any organization can learn. It should not be seen as something which in itself is aimed at ensuring that somebody is blamed for something to happen or is accused of. It is a process, hopefully, that we all learn by, we all do better by, we all get the problem solved as we would wish to see. And therefore the language needs to try to reflect that. And I hope, well, I think it does. Personally, I think it's moved on. I'm very grateful to Claire for taking quite a lot of time, it must be said, in putting this together, in consulting with others, in talking to other councils, and in particular liaising with the unions as well. And I think this is really part of, hopefully, a culture that we are trying to engender in this council of working together, a partnership of working with everybody, working with officials, working with all who work within the council to ensure that we can provide a better service and the best service, perhaps I should say, on behalf of those who we represent. So thank you very much for doing that work, Claire. I appreciate the effort.
Thank you. And yes, I'd echo my thanks to Claire for all her work on this. I've got Councillor Toynbee.
Yes, thank you, Claire. This is really nice and clear. I've just got a question about schools. I don't know what happens in other places, but I'm always worried about the relationship between the council and local schools. And when I ask questions, the answer is always, well, it's complicated. I know it's complicated, and that's not the fault of officers. And, you know, my personal view is that it's been deliberately undermined by government since 2010. And that there's, you know, it's all much too complicated, accountability and everything. But it's really important that people who work in schools feel supported by us if they are whistleblowing. And, you know, we know from recent cases that, you know, children's safeguarding is naturally of huge public interest. And I don't know what we can do, but I suppose I need reassurance that we can support whistleblowers in schools, whatever their individual school policies are.
Yeah, the policy makes it clear that the individual school should have their own whistleblowing policy. So I have had occasions where I have had school whistleblowers, you know, and I have pointed them in the direction of the correct procedures to follow. So I certainly don't close the door. I say that this is the procedure to follow, and provide that advice, but it wouldn't follow our 4 steps for the council.
Is that still true of council maintained schools as opposed to academies? Are they different in the way that they have their whistleblowing operates, or is each academy different from any other, and each school's different from every other?
Each governing body should have their own whistleblowing policy, which would be followed for staff. The only time that it might come into our remit might be if there is one of our direct employed members of staff in that school doing something. I don't know, perhaps a social worker who goes into a school and sees something, then it might come into our procedure.
Right, I can see why Councillor Toynbee says it's complicated.
Yeah.
It obviously is. Councillor Toynbee, you wanted to come back on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, so does it mean that unless it's a direct employee of the council, there are no risks to us of cases in schools?
So if a matter happens in a school, First, there'd be a LADO procedure, which is completely separate to whistleblowing. So if something happens in school related to safeguarding of a member of staff's involvement, that would come through with the council's LADO procedures, which is about suitability to be in that role. So there's that protection. If something happens in school which is to do with safeguarding, which would mean a referral into children's wellbeing through the Section 47 MASH route, that would be another route. But whistleblowing, which is about matters that are uncomfortable, illegal, would be dealt with by their own governing body rather than the management of the council. So it is a tapestry, I would say.
Eloquently put. Thank you. Are there any other questions here? I just like to comment that I was pleased to see that one of the considerations, one of the recommendations that we put forward to involve an independent body, and in this instance, I think Buckinghamshire Council has stepped forward into that role, was taken up, and I think that enhances our whistleblowing process considerably. If Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to bring up that point as well, but also just to ask for the public who may be joining us, is that what about whistleblowing by a elected member on a member of staff? Could you just outline what the process is for that?
Yeah, so that's now covered. It wasn't previously. So if a member did whistleblow to me, I used to use this procedure, but it wasn't expressly covered. So this time it is covered now. So members can use the procedure to whistleblow.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What I will make sure, if I can just say, because obviously I know what's happened, the working group knows what's happened, and you as a committee now know what's happened with this. There obviously will be communications out to all staff and to members to ensure everyone knows how to use the new procedure.
Excellent. That is important. Yes, we don't want to create the procedure and then hide it away in the library, as it were. Okay. So following the recommendation is following recommendations for the working group, policies attached to Appendix 1 is reviewed and agreed for adoption. Are we content that we put that forward to the vote? In which case, can I ask the clerk to put the voting paper forward? And we'll see everybody back from the waiting room in just a moment.
The voting number will be 7, Chair, if Jen wants to launch the poll.
Thank you.
Chairman, all votes have been cast and they have voted in favour to approve those recommendations.
Thank you. Can you invite everybody back from the waiting room? I'm pleased to say the recommendation was passed to adopt this code, and I intend now to return to item 8, the energy from waste loan update. Purpose of this item is to provide assurance to the Audit and Governance Committee on the current status of the energy from waste loan arrangement to enable the committee to fulfill its delegated functions. And just to remind members, those functions are as laid out in the Constitution relating to this particular item. Andrew Lovegrove, would you care to just introduce the report?
Yes, happy to. Thank you, Chair. This is, as you said, is about the role of the council as the lender to this arrangement. I appreciate the council has a number of other interactions with these arrangements, but this is the bit this committee is asked to look at in terms of the loan. I'm pleased to be able to report that no news is good news. As we've got in the appendices, everything is performing the way it should, and there are no concerns to raise with you as we say in the report, the arrangements for dealing with the COVID issues for this plant and the loan seem to be working very well, and there's nothing to raise with you as a concern.
Thank you. Any questions from any member of committee? Councillor Balderson.
Thank you, Chair. No news is good news. However, I do have a slight concern around the dates of the news. Probably 2 or 3 areas which Mr. Lovegrove, you might just like to respond to. Firstly, I thought we were to receive the assurance statement twice a year. But the assurance statement that we've got in front of us today is dated the 3rd of December 2019, so is now 10 months out of date. I also see that the consulting letter was dated the 30th of September 2019, so over a year old. And given the impact of COVID, I'm not quite sure if it would be prudent to obtain more up-to-date statement. And then I also thought we were to receive ratio calculations and a ratio compliance certificate, including a number of, I think, 3 different ratios. And I do see that there has been a risk added to the risk register, but I don't fully understand this risk and how it's impacting on the delivery of some of these other details that I thought we were meant to be looking at as our role as audit governance. So I was just hoping you might explain that risk a little bit further, Mr. Lovegrove, and comment on the dates of the assurance statements.
Lovegrove.
Yes, certainly. I need to check, but my understanding it was an annual assurance process, not a 6-monthly one, but I will check on that in terms of what the Constitution says. In terms of the dates, you're right that they are dated when they're dated. We have an ongoing dialogue with the provider on the arrangements. So I'm advised there are no other issues. I'm just being advised that we do now have an up-to-date set of certificates that are used as part of will be presented to the external auditors as part of their annual audit process. So we are now in possession of the updated reports. So I'm very happy to share them as amendments to or additions to the minutes.
Perhaps that is possible, Clark, if we can circulate those as updates. I think that would be quite useful rather than having documents which are so out of date. I'm just while I'm speaking, I'm trying to look through the Constitution as to the period, but I'll see if I can find that.
There was a question asked about the ratios. My understanding is that when this appeared at the committee last time, that there was a request to not share the ratios with you. So I'm very happy to share them. There's nothing to hide there, but I'm very happy to provide them.
I think yes. I think the question came last time as to what they meant, and the answer was that we weren't quite sure what they meant. Which was perhaps interpreted as we don't want to see them, but I think we do want to see them, but we'd like to understand what it is they mean. Because I think the point, and I'm casting my mind back 12 months, was that I wasn't sure whether, if the ratio is higher, is that a good thing, or is it the ratio was lower was a good thing? And I don't think it was immediately apparent as to which was which. So perhaps that would, with a bit of understanding, that word of explanation might give us some additional comfort.
Very happy to provide that, Chair.
Claire Ward.
Just on the Constitution point, I've had a look at the functions of this committee. It doesn't talk about the frequency. That may have been caught on another discussion on this item, that you wanted to see it more frequently, but it's not within the actual Constitution.
I think it was in the minutes. I think it was in the minutes, or it was in your report, that came to our committee last year, that it was a biannual statement. So that's where I picked it up from.
Perhaps we can just check that and confirm the veracity of those minutes. I have Councillor Matthews.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As a result of Mr. Lovegrove's comments, I move the recommendation. Perhaps we could add a condition that the situation is closely monitored, and if any issues arise, they'd be brought back to the Audit and Governance Committee. Subject to that.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder for the for the motion being the recommendation being moved at this time? Councillor Balderson, you're willing to second that? So the vote is that the motion, that the recommendation be put at this time. Can I have a vote, please? Caroline, can we vote by the usual process on that?
Yes, we can. And the voting number will be 7, and Jen will put the poll up now for you.
Thank you.
Chairman, all votes have been cast. 6 members vote in favour for that recommendation, 1 abstention.
Thank you. So just a point of procedure. So I now put the recommendation. Is that right? Or so we voted that the recommendation be put. So we now have to vote to put the recommendation. So the recommendation is that the risks the lender as council as lender are confirmed as being reasonable and appropriate, having regard to the risk typically assumed by long-term senior funders to waste projects in the United Kingdom and the best banking practice, and that arrangements for the administration of the loan are reviewed and confirmed as satisfactorily. So sorry, you've got to vote again on that.
The voting number remains at 7, Chair.
Thank you.
If Jen wouldn't mind putting up another poll for me.
I'm just waiting on 1 last vote, Chair.
Has everybody voted and press submit?
And all votes have been cast now,
Thank
Chair. All in favour for that recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back, folks from the waiting room. That recommendations were passed. So agenda item 10, the work programme update. To provide an update on the work programme, and you all have the updates in front of you. I'd ask the clerk to make any comment she has on the updates that we've got.
Chair, there was one move of committee items, which was you were due to receive the annual anti-fraud and bribery and corruption strategy at the request of the officer writing that report. This was moved to January, so you just may wish to note that.
Thank you. Yes, I think we did discuss that previously. So any other comments on the work programme? In which case, can I ask for...
Chair,
sorry, Chair, I just jump in there.
Sorry.
I was just looking for the November meeting for dealing with external audit, because that's going to be our anticipated
that's your meeting,
report.
as it were.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it is in there. Oh, I've already gone past it. I think it is in there.
The statement of accounts is in there together with the external auditors' reports.
Yeah. Statement of accounts and external auditors' reports is in there.
Okay, for November. Okay.
For November. Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, Deputy, the monitoring officer wishes to speak.
Right.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. One item I just want to raise is you'll recall from the draft annual governance statement and from the annual code of conduct review that we had at the last meeting that what I will want to bring back to this committee is the arrangements under which code of conduct complaints are dealt with. And I'm suggesting that that would be earlier rather than later. I think, Caroline, we've said January committee. Just wondering whether the committee would like to have a working group looking at that before it comes back to committee. And if so, I would suggest that a working group is convened from this meeting onwards, please. Following last meeting, we have asked for views of the parish councils as requested in HALC on the procedures. And we also have our lessons learnt and review of procedures with our independent persons next week. So the work is starting.
Thank you for that. Yes, open to other members of committee. I think if we ask you to prepare a draft paper in line with the recommendations coming forward from the independent members and the parish councils and any member that wants to input into the review, I'm not sure that our working party from us would add any benefit to that, although we could review the draft paper. Any comment by any other members of committee? So constitutionally, how might that work without a working party from us? Would a draft paper come forward?
Yeah, so what
in
will
a
happen,
similar way to the
whistleblowing, absolutely same.
I think that's appropriate. We've not seen any significant factors emerging, and I'm sure we can input into the paper individually anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there is, I still have to take a vote, I think.
Chair, Councillor Ginman has his hand raised.
Sorry, Councillor Ginman, I missed you. Yes.
Simply, you asked the question. I was simply going to support what you were saying. It seemed to me that I don't think we need to spawn lots of committees, and this is one of those occasions where I think it's probably very sensible. We take the pragmatic solution that you've suggested, and we take that forward, and we input it at that time when we've got both a paper on the suggested way forward or changes, and perhaps a supporting evidential paper summarizing with a summary of what has been put forward by the parishes and by the independent person, so we can see what potentially what other options might have been considered in putting your paper together. So I'm not looking for a large one, but I just think that if we've got some headline points that you can suggest, that might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ginman. Can we just vote on the work programme, please? Usual voting papers again.
The voting number remains at 7. If Jen would please launch the poll for us.
Chairman, all members have voted in favour unanimously.
Thank you. If we can bring everybody back from the waiting room. Thank you all. And the item 11 now, the external audit update, the Redmond review. And this purpose of this, presented by our external auditors, John Roberts and Gail Turner-Radcliffe, is to share with the committee the findings of the National Redmond Review, which is the national review that's been going on, and its anticipated impact this is expected to have on the future work of the committee. If I could ask John Roberts to sort of concentrate on elements which affect us as a committee in our work, in principle. We won't. I can see that, and committee members have commented before on the presentation that's been provided. But if you'd like to concentrate on perhaps some of the salient points that's come out, that might lead to some more interesting questions coming forward.
Okay,
thank you.
Chair. Yeah, certainly, and it's been set up as a workshop, and we've talked in the past about running a workshop. Obviously, we're in different times at the moment, so we have a slide deck which starts on page 71, but I'm not going to take you through every slide. Purposes of time and so on, but I do recommend that you do have a look at them and read through them. I've been around as a local auditor now for 33 years, and local audit in definition is audits undertaken under the Local Audit and Accountability Act, which is local authorities and NHS bodies. And within local authorities, there's a broader definition that also includes police and fire and some other sort of miscellaneous bodies, such as national parks and so on. The context of the Redmond review is it's one review out of a number that have been undertaken on audit at the moment. On page 74, set out the context that we're working in the audit world. And it's important to note that the firms that do local audit are all multi-service firms. They all do other things as well as audit, and particularly they do commercial audit as well as local audit. And sorry,
Jerry, I'm still on that bloody.
Thank you, John. Please proceed. John, we've lost sound from you for some reason. I don't know whether. Yeah, you're back again.
Yeah. So we're on page 74. The audit world is very much under the spotlight following the collapse of Carillion British Home Stores. Patisserie Valerie certainly caught the headlines, but in the public sector, Northamptonshire Council also. And so Redmond was brought in as to focus on the local authority world in particular, but there were also reviews running in parallel on the role of the regulator, the FRC. That was a review led by Sir John Kingman, on the audit market itself, which is the Competition and Markets Authority, and on the scope and quality of audit, which was the Bryden review. So Redmond has to fit into quite a crowded landscape. But what is important from the committee's perspective is to know that the audit firms are looking at a range of things, and local audit is one of those things. So it does come back to prioritization, and it does come back to the fragility of the local audit market, because the firms are considering some of the, so the really big ticket messages in the private sector, and that could mean that the security of the local audit market is under threat. And you will want to be assured that whoever does your audits in the future is a firm that wants to invest in local audit. And that's what the point of the Redmond review is all about. On page 75, I've sort of brought together what the Audit Commission used to do before it was abolished in 2012. It had a field force, so there was a public sector audit practice, if you like, that was able to sort of balance off the risks to the market. Now that field force has gone, and we're now in a market-only provision for local audit. The Audit Commission also set the audit scope through the code of practice. It set fees. Fees were about 3 times the level of what they are now, and no one complained. It also mandated work in certain areas, and it regulated audit quality. So it could determine that the regulator inputs focused on the areas that mattered most to the sector. And I think we've lost that during the course of the reforms as well. The Audit Commission's role was scattered across a number of bodies, which are set out on page 76, just for the committee to be aware, really, of the fragmented landscape that we're in. And what was missing from this jigsaw puzzle is clear identification of who was leading local audit, what one of these stakeholders was responsible for leading the regime. I put a question mark there that should say role of MHCLG. But clearly MHCLG is a very important stakeholder in all of this, and was quite quiet really over the last few years in terms of its role as the sponsoring government department. Pressures started to sort of be experienced by the local audit sector through early close. That's on page 77, where the deadline for completing the audits was brought forward. That moved the deadline from December to September for a number of years, and then to July. And we're only in the third year that audits are supposed to be delivered by July. Clearly, we're on the 14th of October. And as a portfolio, Grant Thornton has, I think we've got about 250 local government audits. I think we've signed 2 at the moment. So that's partly in response to COVID, but partly in response to the fact that this reduction in time scale to complete the audits was just proven to be impossible. The other things that happened is local authority accounts became extremely complicated, and through successive audit tendering, audit fees were reducing. On page 78, I show, which is information that's in the public domain, and I have already presented this in the public domain as a good illustration, the Birmingham City Council audit compared over a 10-year period. And that council's accounts went from 91 pages to 219 pages, but within that 219 pages is a lot more complexity and risk. And the bottom line of it all was the audit fee reduced. Even though the audit became more complicated and longer, the audit fee reduced from 700,000 to 241,000. So that sort of fee pressure was really starting to tell. Then we have our regulator, the FRC, on page 79. Now, the FRC can determine whether a firm continues to be licensed to work in this area. And the FRC was certainly driving audit quality and driving audit input, expecting auditors to do more and more.
Sorry, John, could you, for those listening at home who might not understand what financial regulator...
The Financial Reporting, the Financial Reporting Council, sorry, Chair. Financial Reporting Council is the proper authority for audit for the UK, and it regulates the quality of audit work across both the private sector, audits of large listed companies, and the audits of local authorities, particularly the larger local authorities. And the FRC's part of the FRC's mission against this backdrop of Carillion and British Home Stores and so on is to really drive and improve audit quality through doing more work, becoming more challenging, and becoming more technical in certain areas. And that has a bearing in the Redmond work around auditors' work on property, plant and equipment. That's PPE in our context, not the personal protective equipment in the COVID context. But also in pensions valuations. And the FRC was what's changed was been driving local audit work in these areas to the standards that it expects from a FTSE 350 company, which is in part contributing to the pressures that were being felt when Redmond was commissioned, because to do work to that level of quality requires a lot more input and a lot more fee and a lot more time to do it than had been envisaged in the local audit framework, and certainly was envisaged when the last round of tenders was let. So since the tenders was let, the whole local audit world changed as a result of what was going on in the private sector in Carillion and so on, and also the FRC's response to what was going on there. So it was all getting very difficult, and last summer, although we were able to complete your audit within the 31st of July timescale, on page 80 you can see that over 40% of audits across all the firms nationally were not signed by that date. Auditors were trying to compensate with fee variations, and we've received positive response from this council on where we've put forward fee variations. It's not a cozy relationship by any means, but we certainly feel that the council appreciates that the audit needs to have enough time, hence fee, to be able to do the work to appropriate levels of quality. From an authority's perspective, and the committee will be familiar with the complexity of the council's accounts, that's become a really significant challenge as years of austerity have reduced finance department capacity, and generally the accounts have become more complicated and risky as a result of that. That's certainly something that's in the background as we plan our audit work and as we work with councils. And then the final point that was resulting in difficult circumstances for the audit firms was that the people we employ and the investment we make in people, they are highly employable people. So retaining people in a work area where there are lots and lots of challenges, when frankly they could just do something else and get better pay or certainly a better work in life as a result of it. It's the challenge of being able to keep those specialized people that deliver the right quality, and Redmond certainly comments on that in his report. So as a result, the local audit market is of some concern, which is what's instigated the Redmond review. Is this market strong enough to survive the challenges that it's facing now? PSAA has done a review itself, and that's reported on page 81, and that's found that the market is really actually at that sort of virtually at breaking point. There's a limited number of firms in that market. Those firms are under pressure. So what can be done to make that market more sustainable for the benefit of the recipients of those audits? So for the benefit of the councils such as Herefordshire. So ensuring that you've got good firms that invest in the right people, that invest in the right training, that do work to the right levels of quality, to time scale, that can be relied upon. All those things are issues that the committee needs to be comfortable that it's going to be able to continue to work with an external audit firm. In health at the moment, health bodies procure their own auditors individually, and in some parts of the country, health bodies are actually struggling to find an auditor. And if you can't get an external auditor, that introduces a whole range of risks to the organisation. That what would your bank view about that? What does government view about that? What do your major stakeholders view about that if you're struggling to find an auditor? So this is all about making sure not just that you get an auditor in the next generation, but that auditor is specialist and competent and gives the right quality of service to you as well. So that's what prompted the Redmond review. It was not just considering the audit market, but it was considering the audit environment. So it was considering the reporting role of councils, the governance of the interface between the council and the auditor through the audit committee. There's a number of key recommendations for the audit committee in Redmond, and also the sustainability of the service to be provided. So on page 83 is the headlines, and the next slides are all what Redmond says, not my personal opinion. So this is all factual from the Redmond review. So he comments on the fragility of this market. He talks about timetabling and capacity of auditors, and the fact that this has to be attractive work in order to ensure its sustainability. So in terms of his detailed findings, he looks at systems leadership as a key point, the key place to start. And he recommends a new organization to be set up that's not the Audit Commission. It's not the size and scale of the Audit Commission, and it doesn't cover the range of functions of the Audit Commission, but it will provide a clear focus for systems leadership. And he calls that organization the Office for Local Audit and Regulation. He also comments the fees are too low. I think we've already been dealing with this. Fees in the context of a local authority spend are very, very small, actually, although it's an emotive area. But I would remind you of that trend that over a number of years fees have reduced to a third of what they once were. Redmond talks about fee increases of between 25–30% in order to ensure that firms are able to invest in the people and skills to do the work properly. He also recommends moving the timetable for the audit from July to September. I think that was a very clear and obvious recommendation. This year, it's been extended to November for COVID reasons. I think falling back to September is a sensible solution. That doesn't mean every authority will have their work concluded in September. It'll be important to timetable where authorities can go early. It'll be important to timetable those in as well. So we do the audits in a number of phases. So, and I would suggest that Herefordshire offers a good opportunity for us to still focus on an early completion date, say towards the end of July or into August, to allow the phase in to be met at some of the authorities that maybe have struggled more to meet the timetable in the past. Then an area that I'm sure members will be highly interested in is financial reporting. We now have local authority financial reports run into 200 pages. Do we all understand them? Do members of the public understand them? Certainly not. So how do you engage in financial reports that are meaningful and impactful and contain the emphasis on the right things? So Redmond himself picks up this point about the complexity of asset accounting and the valuations around that as being a distraction, because it doesn't actually impact on a local authority's duties, and it doesn't actually impact on the bottom line and the council tax and the funding, financial sustainability side of local authorities. On page 88, Redmond talks about governance and transparency, where he's suggesting that local authorities could be strengthened through greater use of independent members, that those are technically qualified. Also that training arrangements, some sort of more formal training arrangements are put in place to audit committees. He's recommending that the auditor engages with full council more formally, at least once a year, to present the audit findings at a meeting of full council. And he also formalizes the relationship between the auditor, the chief exec, the monitoring officer, and the finance director. I think in Herefordshire's case, we actually do mirror the arrangements that Redmond is looking for, which is sort of regular and formal meetings anyway. But he's building that into his requirements. He's also recommending that external audit and internal audit work more effectively together. There are some limitations there caused by auditing standards that we can't, as external auditors, formally rely on internal audit work. But Redmond makes the point, and it's a good point, I think, that you could get more benefit out of closer coordination between internal and external audit, and also between external audit and the various inspectorates that operate in local government. I'm just looking from a point of time now. I'm just looking at the other slides. Those were the key points on account simplification. it's tricky because the accounts themselves have to provide a number of, they have to be a number of things to a number of people. So they have to report under international financial reporting standards, but they also have to report under the rules and legislation that local authorities operate under. And over the face of those accounts, one has to be translated into the other and vice versa. It's very, very complicated. And this is why you result in statements of accounts that are unfathomable and run to 200 pages long. So Redmond has asked SIPFA-LASAC.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. Could you just say that last bit again?
Okay, so local authority accounts have to do two basic things. They have to demonstrate compliance with the law as it impacts on local authorities. And that is, they have to be able to demonstrate and tie back into your general fund and link back to your responsibilities for raising council tax and NDR and so on. So there is a whole range of legislative requirements specific to local government that the accounts must demonstrate compliance with. Now, a company wouldn't have to do that. A company would just have to report its accounts under international financial reporting standards, and you would see that the typical profit and loss type accounts. Now, because local authority accounts also feed into the whole of government accounts, they have to be prepared under international financial reporting standards, as well as being prepared under the rules and regulations that apply specifically to local government. And that's what really makes it complicated, because in preparing both these versions of the truth, you have to have a translation between the both. And under the current reporting arrangements, that has to be done through the accounts themselves, which makes them really, really complicated things, much more complicated than even a big company. And the challenge is why do we have that? Because that requires the council to invest a lot of time in reporting it, and it certainly requires the auditor to invest a lot of time in auditing it, because every page of those accounts we have to audit. So if we could simplify that accounting model, that would help not just in terms of the cost and time required to do the work. It would help in terms of how clear these accounts are to a member of the public. So that's recommendation one. Now, if that proves too difficult, because there are a number of obstacles potentially to that, then Redmond is suggesting that a summary report is produced. Now, a summary report will be very helpful when it comes to communicating the council's finances externally, because that will be an audited summary report. But that won't reduce the work. That'll actually increase the work if we can't do something to replace what we've currently got, because that summary will be in addition to what we've got, not instead of. So there's some challenges there for government, certainly, to respond to. And one of the biggest challenges is that the current form of accounts features in the government's whole of government accounts. So the government would have to give way on its requirements for whole of government accounts in order to facilitate local government simplifying its reporting accounts. And that's always been an area of difficulty for SIPFA when it comes to setting the local government accounting framework. So I'll just finish with the last two slides. What do I like? I think it's important that, and I would say this, wouldn't I, as an auditor, but I think this is important to recognize that the responsibility for making this work doesn't just rest with the auditors. The auditors can't do everything on their own. We can certainly invest in the training of our people. We can invest in more people. We can invest in capacity and in measures to retain our people and specialize, but it's important that the framework works for us as well. So in Redmond, he has recommendations for councils, for audit committees that I've just covered, for regulators and stakeholders through setting up this more clear systems leadership through the Office of Local Audit and Regulation, and for SIPFA in terms of simplifying the accounting code. So I like the fact that I think within Redmond are all the conditions that should make this optimistic, should make us optimistic for the future of local audit. But what else? And that's the final slide before we take any questions. That's on page 93. So I think it's really important that we take this one-off opportunity to do whatever we need to do and do it properly. Local audit also covers the NHS. So I would like to see the NHS brought into any reforms that take place. At the moment, Redmond's remit only extended to local authorities. And I know there's talk behind the scenes of getting more alignment with the NHS model. I think for it to work, then OLA, the new Office for Local Audit Regulation, would need to be able to appoint and set the fees for all auditors, and there shouldn't be an opt-in, opt-out option, which you currently have with PSAA. Account simplification, I've mentioned the whole of government accounts and why that is a blockage for the for all sorts of simplification reforms that we should have in place. That's the subject of a whole other workshop, that is, so I won't get into that too much, but it's a big, I think that's a big, if I could have one silver bullet to shoot at this whole thing to make it work better, it would be to simplify the accounting process. We've got to look at the market, and we've got to find ways of getting the firms that have recently left the market to come back and encouraging new firms to come back, and potentially encouraging a public sector provider, for example, to exist. At the moment, we don't have that. That's probably a long, long way away, but those sorts of things will help to ensure a more resilient and balanced market. And I also think it's important to reflect on the fact this legislation will probably take 3 years to affect. So I think we really do need government to be pushing this now to get on with any reforms that we can in advance of legislation. And I know the firms will support those reforms, but it needs that appreciation from central government, from MHCLG, that this is a matter of urgency, and the Redmond responses, which are very sensible and very well thought through, need their support and need to be driven through. Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, John. Do committee members have any questions they wish to raise at this juncture? A lot of information to take in. Councillor Ginman.
Well, really, just a comment. I appreciate the Redmond report is one report. The Bryden report is another one, which is a bigger and more overarching report on the same subject area. There is somewhat of a difference between what Eric Pickles envisaged in the first place of this central-based audit body with lots of auditors going around the place, and what Generic has suggested since in terms of much more local-based, local event. It strikes me that the changes might be some way off unless you have any indication that the current view has changed from HCLG, and that are we going to lose that, what Generic originally said, of a more local based, locally approved, locally interested audit, and head more into the old system that was suggested, which, given Redmond's background, isn't too surprising. Being very cynical, sorry.
Yeah, and it's a real challenge, isn't it? Because I think when the Audit Commission was abolished, the market was different. There was much more demand, so the firms would, there were more firms involved, more firms keen to do the work. I think over time, with the increased regulation and with the increased focus on the private sector, where firms are having to sort of gear up their responses in the private sector, which frankly is a much more sort of high fee, high profitability area. The firms can choose what areas to be in and what not to be in. If you had a purely local situation now, I would imagine that quite a range of authorities would struggle to be able to attract an auditor to be able to do their work.
Thank you. Councillor Toynbee.
Yeah, thank you, John. That's actually very interesting. I think the situation we're in was probably fairly predictable when Eric Pickles abolished the Audit Commission, and it seems to be a bit of a pattern, and everything gets fragmented and outsourced and piecemeal, and then there's a review and people say, oh, we've got to have more joined up thinking, and let's have a new umbrella organisation, and so it goes on round and round and round, entirely predictably, things that in my opinion all happen for ideological reasons in the first place. But so the status of this review and the recommendations, it's a recommendation to government, and do you think they will accept the recommendations? And if they do, do you think it will? Do you think it'll do what you hope in terms of clarification and simplification?
I think it will. I'm in favour of the report. I certainly am. I think it will only work if it's got urgency behind it, because if things are left to drift for too long, it only takes one of the big firms to decide that it no longer wants to be in this market for it to be a huge problem covering the whole of the country. You're right, Redmond makes recommendations to government, and then it's up to government to determine to take those forward. So as I understand it, government will be running a consultation on the recommendations, and those will then drop into its policy setting side of things, and they'll determine what and how to take forward matters, including legislation and other measures. The risk, I think, when it comes back to the urgency side, is MHCLG has a long list of priorities. How high is audit going to be on that list of priorities, and how high is local government going to be on government-wide priorities when we've got, coming out of COVID, rebuilding the economy, impact of Brexit, all sorts of big ticket issues that government will be grappling with as well. So I'm trying to sort of lead a crusade for not forgetting about this, because it could be, like I say, it's still fragile, and if it breaks, it could be very difficult to manage over a number of years until we can rebuild capacity in some shape or form.
Thank you for that. Yes, very concerning. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was quite interested in the report, and particularly around having independent persons on, who are technically minded, because as a newly elected member, and I certainly don't come from an audit background, but I have certainly learned, and I am still learning every time I come to these committees. And actually, I'm finding it really interesting. I think I'm starting to get worried. I always look forward to the swap report. So I think, oh, crikey, what's this mean for the future? But I was wondering, and this question is related, because we're doing a rethinking governance at the moment within Herefordshire Council, and I don't know if it's that we have to wait till central government directives, or if we can be proactive, because I find the independent panel and the code of conduct process extremely valuable. I think that we've got some incredibly technically, some very, very good people on the independent panel. And is there scope within Herefordshire Council to actually being proactive, to actually look at getting an independent person on the audit and governance? And maybe this has been discussed before in the past, but I certainly think for new members, particularly those of us who never intended to become politicians, to have training around audit when they join the audit and governance committee right at the beginning. I know that it was offered at SWAP, and I wasn't able to attend that training, but there are two initial points on that. And any way that we can make reporting much more user-friendly for members of the public would be great too, in terms of ensuring our own accountability.
Mm-hmm. And certainly the independent member question, I'm not sure when it was last considered here, but that has been considered by other authorities, and independent members have been in place at audit committees for a number of years now. And, I think it's really important to stress the fact that councillors bring their councillor skills to the audit committee. as well, and we don't lose sight of that. So we don't want just clones of a, you know, an ex-partner of a firm being you know, it's important to have that diversity. But I think bringing the skill set in and bringing the opportunity to ask maybe more technically informed questions is really good, because it's sort of that sort of questioning then rubs off on other members of the committee and they learn from it as they go as well. But it's important that you get the right person, because I've also seen independent members which haven't quite worked out as well at other authorities. Yeah.
Thank you for that, and I think Councillor Watson, that the work about an independent member of the committee is something that we will examine in when we're reviewing the work of this committee in the coming few months. I think Claire has left us, but I think there is provision within the Constitution that we can adopt an independent member, and it's up to us to make sure that you know, any consideration in terms of their competence is reflected. And it's also probably important to remember we're in audit and governance, so we do cover governance as well as audit within our remit. And I know, talking to other audit and governance type committees where the independent member is actually chair, there is again a slightly different chemistry between governance and audit under those circumstances. I've still got two hands up, so Councillor Ginman and then Councillor Matthews.
Thank you. I don't wish to prolong this, but I did note it. Redmond was talking about the effect on parish councils, and given our particular backgrounds as councillors, and we're engaging with parish councils, I just wondered if there was any comment that you'd like to make about his suggestions that with regard to parish councils.
It's not an area that we're currently active in, actually, Councillor Ginman. So I probably won't answer that question, I'm afraid.
Councillor Matthews, you are unmuted.
Yep, thank you, Chairman. I would just like to ask Mr. Lovegrove what his views are of these recommendations, and does he see any real benefits?
Thank you, Councillor. That's a very big question for a very big subject. I think that the point's been well made that it's very hard for the general public to follow our accounts and how we report. They're written by accountants for accountants, which is great if you're an accountant, but sadly not everybody is. And we are responsible for spending large amounts of public money. So anything that improves the ability to explain in very clear language to members of the public what we've done with their money, I think has to be welcomed. And that is a very positive step, and I think that we need to embrace that solidly. The points about the fees are well made. The accounts have become very complicated, and the twists and turns that we have to do to produce them are significant, let alone then have to audit them. So I have a deal of sympathy for the challenges the firms face, and when they tendered, the world was a very different place. I do accept that arrangement. And I have experienced, as others have, the roles of independent people on audit committees, either chairing or being part of it. And I think the key to that is be very clear what skills and what competences you're wanting to bring to the meeting, and to be clear that that's what you're getting. So having a review process. So I think it is overall. I think that the report makes some very good recommendations that do need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you for that. If there are no more questions, Councillor Watson, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just to, because my issue is around the training and development as well as all members. And I do wonder in the near future, is that to actually have an all members briefing, because it shouldn't be up to just us on the audit and governance to look at, you know, the accounts, but give opportunity to all members to engage in the audit and governance process. So it's something that I'd just like to float for a future, that we could maybe do a all members briefing about.
Yes, I believe that an all members briefing on the accounts was a concept that was in the planning, but I suspect COVID overran it. Council, Mr. Lovegrove, is that correct?
Yes, events have overtaken that, certainly.
Yeah. However, I echo your comments, and you know, the council, all its services, all its work relies on you know, being able to fund and to fund its services, and how those funds are spread and where they come from and where they go out is always a constant of constant interest, if not a constant mystery to many of us. So I just like to well, I'll conclude. I'll thank John. We have to do a little recommendation, but before that, I'll just sort of pass my comments, I suppose. I note, as somebody else has, that Redmond, you know, he is a well, very highly regarded accountant in his own right, past president of SIPFA, and we perhaps should anticipate that his recommendation should be to enhance the breadth and scope of his profession. As an engineer, I would perhaps reflect that, you know, we've got the increased rigor of audit, we've got the increased standard, the higher standard of audit, the level of assurance, the depth and breadth, and yet we still seem to have some spectacular whoopses in the audit world, and I suspect it's more to do with what we do with the audit, in fact, than the audit themselves. Figures can be delivered in a variety of ways. They can tell a variety of stories. The skill is perhaps in interpreting those figures, and not always adhering to sort of that type of rigid portrayal, but understanding what lies behind the figures and where they're actually taking you, which is why I always love ratios and you know, looking back historically as to where ratios are moving. However, we'll see what comes out of the audit report. I doubt whether we'll also look forward, I'm sure, Andrew Lovegrove will look forward to the discussions over fee arrangements in future years. So if I could ask Clark to bring forward the recommendation that the committee note Grant Thornton's presentation attached Appendix 1 on the initial Sertoni Redmond independent review of local audit and consider the impact on the future role and reporting of the committee. Can we bring forward that as the vote, please?
The voting number will be 7. If the poll could be launched, please, Jen.
Chairman, all votes are in, unanimously in favour to approve those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I note the date of the next meeting will be the 17th of November, 2020. Currently the time is at 10:30 a.m. I have had a request that the time be brought forward, perhaps between now and notice of that agenda being officially placed. You could advise me, committee members could advise me if they wish the time to be brought forward. to 10 o'clock or 10:15, but I have had that request made. Finally, before I formally close the meeting, can I check that with the democratic